Welcome to the entertaining Talkin' Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I am going to start a series that I did last year called the Gettleman Project. And in my first video of the Gettleman Project, I am going to assess the salary cap and put myself in the mind of Dave Gettleman and basically tell you what I would do just specifically in free agency. In this video, I'm going to break down the current salary cap. I'm going to break down the adjustments that I would make to the salary cap to create more space. And then I am going to go over what you really have to focus on when you're spending the salary cap that the New York Giants will be provided, whether it be in terms of thinking about short-term deals so you could get out of them after a year or two to create space to extend players like Saquon Barkley or Daniel Jones. You always want to strive for short-term contracts if you can to give yourself the flexibility in the following years. If you feel like there's a player that you want to sign to a 4 or 5 year contract in next year's free agency class, you never want to be strapped for cash year in and year out. Now, there are certainly some names out there that everyone talks about that the Giants could look at on long-term deals who are still relatively young. We all know about Unique. We all know about Conklin and everybody else. Obviously, the Giants have a ton of needs. You could look around this roster, the center position, the tackle position, the edge rusher, the middle linebacker, safety, corner. There are so many holes on this roster that the New York Giants can only fill so many in free agency, and obviously they'll attempt to fill the rest in the draft. You'll see what I did. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but we're going to jump right into the video. We're going to look at the current salary cap for the New York Giants. We're going to look at what I do to create salary cap space, and then we're going to look at how I spend it and the things that you have to think about what you have to spend the money on, and I'm going to give you individual players that I would spend this on in free agency. So, here we go. First, we're going to look, and we're going to do some salary cap adjustments. Now, according to Sport Track, which is who I go to for my salary cap news, and maybe it's a little more, maybe it's a little less, the current salary cap right now is $61.28 million in cap space. This, of course, is before any adjustments. We know the Giants have some cuts on their roster. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I am going to go over the players that I would cut and the most obvious names. We go over it all the time. The 4 players that I think will be cut by the New York Giants to create cap space in this year's free agency class comes out to be about $21 million in cuts. Ogletree, who will save you $8.75 million. You have Antoine Bethea, who's going to save you $2.75 after the dead cap hit. You have Ellison, who saves you about $5, and you have Martin, who saves you close to $5 as well. All in all, I think it comes out to $20.8. I rounded up to 21, which gives you about $81.25 million, $82.25 to spend in free agency. I rounded up just to make it easier and to give us a little more flexibility to $85 million, because maybe you can make a couple more adjustments there on that roster to create some space, to make some signings in free agency. It's just much easier for me to say 85 rather than 82.25 and to break it down that way. Like I said, you can make some adjustments to create a couple more $1 million in space, whether it be, backloading a contract, a couple $1 million here, a couple $1 million there. So the first thing I'm going to say is that 85 now is already 75 because you got to spend approximately $10 million on the draft, right? Your first round pick usually especially when you're picking high, is going to get about $5 million alone with the 4th overall selection in his rookie year, and that will, of course, only go up. So we're going to set aside $10 million for the draft. The other thing I'm going to set aside is exactly what Dave Gettleman has expressed. I'm going to set aside $10 million for in-season moves. He has expressed $20 million. I am going to go off for this exercise, I'm going to say, okay, maybe he meant $10 million for the draft, $10 million for in-season moves. So that gives me, obviously, $65 million to spend now that we hit free agency. And this is where the fun starts. $65 million to spend, that's a lot of money. That's essentially what we started with, 61.28. The cuts basically paid for the in-season moves and the draft expenses. Now, you ask, what could be an in-season move? Well, you could have a trade where you take on cap space. You could have a situation like the Giants have with Riley Dixon where they look to extend him in season. Who knows? They may look to extend some guys on rookie contracts in season. You don't know. So you always want a little bit of cap flexibility in season. You don't want to be strapped for cash, and I'm going to set aside $10 million for that. Next thing we're going to do now is go over the free agent acquisitions. Which players would I spend this money on in the offseason with $65 million to spend? So So there it is. We got $65 million to spend. The first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to set aside $10 million of that $65 million on 1 and 2 year deals for depth pieces. Guys that are going to be backups on this roster, or maybe a fringe starter, whether it's a backup guard, whether it's a backup center, whether it's a center on a bargain deal that maybe I could start like a John Halapio, a kicker. Rosas, I think, is a free agent, and the Giants have the option to bring him back. That's going to cost you about $1 million. So little moves like that, I am going to set aside $10 million for. Remember, guys, it's a 53-man roster. So 10 of it, of the 65, I'm going to set aside just for 1 and 2 year deals. The beauty of that is you could get out of those contracts after 1 year. That's something that we have to be thinking about throughout free agency. Next thing, $7 million for depth on the current roster. Guys, I'm going to bring back that are on the current roster. Now, this could be a little bit more. This is just estimates, but I looked at the current roster and guys that are free agents and guys that you probably want back. You got guys like David Mayo, and a number of other players that I looked at that could be back on this roster. Michael Thomas, Cody Core, who was great in special teams, made just under $1 million last year. Cody Latimer, a tall wide receiver. Aldrick Rosas, and there's a couple others. So I put $7 million aside for that. So that now is going to knock the 65 down to $48 million to spend now. And now we're getting into the additions of players on the roster. And there it is, $48 million to spend. The first player, obviously, I'm going to say is Leonard Williams. I think Leonard Williams will be the first guy we spend money on. Dave Gettleman, who is still the general manager, traded in season last year in a very questionable trade. A trade that a lot of Giants fans didn't understand, but regardless, this guy gave up a 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick if he lets him go, or a 4th-round pick if he retains him in next year's draft, not this year's draft, on the 4th-round pick, to bring in Leonard Williams. And when you give up something to bring in Leonard Williams, I would assume you are going to look to keep him. And I came up with what I think is a fair contract, 4 years, $48 million at 12 per. And some people may say that's crazy because he doesn't get sacks, but at the end of the day, the guy's a good run stuffer. And that's what these players get paid. The top D tackle right now, Aaron Donald's getting $20 million, I think, per season. So he's a good tackle and a guy that can play on the end as well. He's got some flexibility, something Joe Judge is looking for. And I think 12 per is a fair contract. I could see him getting upwards of 14 per. But for this exercise, I'm going to say he makes 12 per, which of course knocks us down to $36 million now to spend on some other people. Next thing I'm going to bring up is Jack Conklin. The reason that I would attack Jack Conklin, and this is just my personal opinion with the remaining $36 million, and this is going to cost me 15, I think it's a huge need. Obviously, the tackle position. Now, Jack is a right tackle. If you were to make this move, you'd probably have to leave Solder at the left tackle for 1 more year, and you could draft your left tackle in this year's draft, whether it be the 1st round, 2nd round. And Jack Conklin is young. I think he's 25, 26 years old. He came off an ACL injury, which is why the Titans did not extend him for a 5th year. But this year, if you look at it, he played so much better over the second half. I'm pretty confident that Jack Conklin is going to be healthy going into next season. And I think he's worth it. I do. I think he's a guy that you wouldn't have to worry about for the next 4 years. You may have to spend 5 on him. 5 for 75, 4 for 60. I'd want the ability to be able to get out of this contract without a hit after 3 years. I'd structure it that way, maybe front load it a little bit, whatever it takes. The same for the Leonard Williams contract. I'd want the ability to get out after 3 years on both of them so I could have the money to extend Daniel Jones if I had to cut these 2 individuals. Obviously, the goal would be to keep both of them. They're both young, but you always want that ability to get out of a contract. So I would look at these almost as 3-year contracts rather than 4 with the ability to get out. I do not want to sign any 5-year deals. That's just my personal opinion. And that now takes the 48. That knocks it down to 21. And then I came up with 2 options here. Option A, which I think a lot of people are going to say because they want that big sexy name, would be to spend $21 million on a top-tier pass rusher. Now, obviously unique, whoever it is, whoever your guy is, that's your top-tier guy, and that eats up the rest of the cap space. But the other thing that does, if you go with option A, is it ties you into a 5-year deal. Any one of those top-tier pass rushers are going to command a 5-year deal, and they're much like a Nate Solder. So if they fail, you're going to have to keep them on the books for 4 years, and you probably will be able to get out after 4. But if they sustain injuries, things like that, and it limits your cap flexibility. So that is option A, and it's certainly an option in this exact scenario that you could go with. Option B, which is probably the decision I would go with, is signing two guys who I feel like could be impact players and fill in two holes rather than one, and have short-term commitments on 3-year contracts with the ability to get out after 2. The first guy I came up with is Trey Waynes. It's just a corner, with some experience, a former first-round pick. He's projected to make $8 million a year according to Sport Track. I moved it up $1 million because Sport Track's usually wrong. He even could get 10 or 11. You don't know. But I said 3 years, $27 million for Trey Waynes. Yes, we've drafted the cornerback position a lot over the last 2 years, but still a lot of inexperience back there. I think it could add some value to add a guy with some experience in that backfield to basically make up for the loss of Janoris Jenkins. And you're not breaking the bank there at 3 years, $27 million. You're also giving yourself the ability to get out after 2. Now, this is just a name I came up with. If you could find another guy, but I would attack a veteran corner spot in this situation. Maybe Bradbury of the Panthers is another guy, if you could get him on a contract like that. I wouldn't want to make more than a 3-year commitment. Like I said, so I have some flexibility to get out after 2. And then finally, with that remaining $10, $11 million, I said I could either bring in a guy like a Jamie Collins, who's about 30 years old, so he's not going to command the same money as a Unique or someone like that, or just retain a Marcus Golden on a 3-year, $33 million. So you keep one, you sign one of those players, a guy like that. Collins, of course, has the ability. I think Collins is more flexible. He could play in both systems. Golden's kind of married to the 3-4, but I wouldn't be upset if you bring back Golden, being that he led the team in sacks last year, and when healthy is obviously good at getting after the quarterback. He had a year with the Cardinals, like he had 12.5 sacks. So that is the route that I would take. In this situation, obviously, you get your depth with the $10 million on 1 and 2 year deals. You retain some of the good players on your roster, that have contracts that are expiring. Guys that I mentioned before, like a Cody Core, David Mayo, Cody Latimer, Michael Thomas, depth players. And then you have about $48 million to spend on big ticket free agents. Leonard Williams, of course, is already on the roster, but we all project he's going to stay here. Conklin would be my one huge piece. And then Trey Waynes and Jamie Collins or Marcus Golden, both on 3-year deals. That is, I think, a prudent approach to take. And that is what I would do if I was the general manager of the New York Giants. That is how I would break down the cap. Something similar to that. Now, it might not be those exact players, but I wouldn't want to make huge commitments outside of maybe one, which would be a 4-year deal. And maybe I'd be willing to go 5 on a Conklin because of how talented he is and how important shoring up that offensive line is for Daniel Jones. The other thing, of course, that does is it gives you a lot more flexibility in the first round of the draft. Now, if you want an Isaiah Simmons, you can go out and do it because you've addressed the offensive line somewhat in free agency. So that's my take, guys. That is what I would do in this year's free agency if I was Dave Gettleman. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think, how you would spend it, and what you thought about this exercise. I plan on doing a lot more Dave Gettleman projects. I'm going to have a mock draft up hopefully by tomorrow. I'm also going to have a video up on Gandy Golden, I hope later today, a prospect that a lot of people have been talking about, that they're interested in the New York Giants potentially drafting in the later rounds of this year's draft. As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.